Hello and welcome back to another update as I cover the latest developments throughout the front line in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. In this one, we see that the Israeli forces continue their fights all around the northwestern and northeastern parts of Gaza without any advancements in territory. There's heavy fights, especially by the Jabalia camp area, where there's a heavy concentration of both forces. So there's coming with that a lot of casualties, of which the Palestinian spokesman of the Hamas forces has said in a video that they have destroyed up to 136 documented vehicles on the Israeli army. So that is a significant part comparing to how little time has passed since the Israeli ground invasion actually began. And with that, we see, if it is true, the Israeli forces are losing a lot more than they're willing to admit. However, this is of course a war, so any side is going to exaggerate how many vehicles they destroy and so on, and downplay their own losses. So it is anywhere between that and divided by 5, because that is typically the amounts between 3 and 5 that people exaggerate with. However, they do claim that they have photo evidence, and based on the videos we see, there is confirmation of a lot of vehicles getting hit, but not so much evidence as to what happens after they're hit. Therefore, again, we can take it with a grain of salt. Not all of them is going to be destroyed, some are going to be damaged, whether lightly or heavily, but there's likely 136 hits, of which some will have destroyed the rockets with the trophy system and others will have survived the hit. However, the fighting isn't just taking place in the north, it's also taking place in the center/south of Gaza City itself, where the Israeli forces moved to the beaches after cutting the Gaza Strip into two and are now fighting in the northwestern parts. This is close to important areas as well as the Gaza City center, of which there is the Shifa Hospital and the Al-Aqsa University here in the western parts of Gaza. This is a heavily populated area, not as much as the central parts of the residential areas or the Jabalia refugee camp, which has higher density, but this whole area itself has a lot of people, considering the economic center of the city. Seeing these advances, someone asked me, well, if they've moved this far, doesn't that mean that the Palestinian Hamas fight against Israel is completely lost already and that they are going to lose, and this is just them slowing them down and so on? But if we compare the fights based on the territory that they have gained, we see here in the northwestern parts, it's mostly open fields. As soon as they hit the urban areas, they started slowing down significantly, with the latest advance here being on the 7th, latest advance here being on the 2nd, latest advance here being on the 6th, and so on. So we see that it has slowed down in the northwestern parts. The northeastern parts is even slower, with the latest advance on the 2nd. The reason for this is they hit the urban area much quicker here in the northeastern parts, and in the central part there was no urban area until now. That is why we have seen them constantly advance. So we're seeing that their advancements is not based on distance and all of that, it is based on what type of territory they're moving through. The more urban it is, the slower it is. The deeper they go, the more difficult it becomes. You have to think, right now, the Israeli supply line to the northwestern parts is either by sea or by going through the central road, straight through the center of Gaza, which is simply not possible because Hamas holds this whole area. So what we're seeing is that with the Israeli forces having to go this whole distance just to reach the urban areas here in the northern parts, they are going to have to face Palestinian fighters fighting all the way from the northwestern parts, central parts, and southern parts, where they're constantly clashing already. So we're seeing that the Palestinian efforts to cut the supplies and so on is working well in their favor with their tunnels. However, talking about tunnels, we have these videos by the Israeli forces, where we see in this one where the Israeli forces moving through the areas where they have taken control of, they detect some of these tunnels and then they drop a lot of explosives down into them and blow them up so that they collapse the whole tunnel in that area. So with that, we see that whenever they find an entrance/exit of a tunnel, they blow it up. Palestinian forces are unable to take control over the area or to sabotage or to launch attacks from there. So there is this very slow process behind the main force fighting on the front lines that is trying to take care of all of the tunnels. However, they are not going down into the tunnels because fighting within the tunnels is very difficult for the Israeli forces, as they do not have any maps or other things of the situation down in the tunnels, and therefore they will just be sitting ducks down there. Some other things we see is that the Israeli forces have now announced that every day in Gaza City there will be a 4-hour pause for our ceasefire, for our truce, to help the civilians and so on. However, we are also seeing heavy bombardments by the Indonesian hospital here in the northern parts of Gaza City. It is at the very outskirts. The reason for this is that very soon, if the Israeli forces manage to capture the Beit Hanun area here in the northeast, the Indonesian hospital will reach the front line. Therefore, they're trying to bombard it heavily right next to it, not the hospital itself, because that is a major, major, major problem if they do that. However, they're bombing around it to try and throw the people within it out, push them away so that they leave it, so that they can bomb it. Because so far we're seeing that the Indonesian hospital will end up at the front line. If fighting takes place there, then it becomes very difficult to execute operations. If the Israeli forces capture the Beit Hanun area, they'll have to move further westwards to try and connect with the other areas. And the same thing will happen whenever they reach the other major hospitals like Shifa Hospital here in the western parts of Gaza. So with this, we see that there's heavy bombardments around in the Indonesian hospital, and there's this 4-hour long pause every day so that they try to make the Palestinian civilians leave during this 4-hour pause and try to bombard the area to get them to get out of the area. Talking about airstrikes in the northern border between Lebanon, we see that the Israeli forces launched massive airstrikes in the southern villages of Lebanon to try and hit Hezbollah positions. The reason for this is that there is an extensive use of artillery on both sides to hit each other's concentration of forces, but also escalating tensions between the two sides as airstrikes increase, rates increase, direct fire, ATGM against Israeli tanks, and so on. So there's an increasing tension between the Israeli forces and the Hezbollah forces, showing that there's going to be more fighting here in this area, with the possibility of actual war taking place between the two sides. However, I believe that possibility is low. It seems that the Hezbollah strategy, according to the Hezbollah leader, who said in a speech a couple of days ago that they are already taking about a third of the Israeli army to the northern borders, and therefore they're already doing their jobs. And since we've already touched upon the subject of how many vehicles have been lost, there is this very interesting picture based on some of the footage we have seen from the battles. And in this footage, we see that there is a concentration of Israeli vehicles here in Gaza City, in one of the outskirts areas in the urban parts, where we see approximately 25. There's definitely more, but we just see how well the camouflage actually works with this terrain, because it's very difficult to actually spot them despite having this picture. I can already see more than 25, but this is what I've been able to mark out with 100% certainty. Why am I talking about this? Because again, as mentioned by many analysts from the Russo-Ukrainian war, this is something that we do not see there, because if this was in Ukraine, then all of these would have been destroyed, because such a large concentration of armored vehicles is a very easy target for targeted artillery, for missile strikes, for drones dropping bombs, land hits, and so on. So this is just a festival for long-range explosives. However, Hamas do not have this in large numbers. But at the same time, Hamas has plenty of tunnels. So it is still a mistake to do this, because what if Hamas fighters detect it, find it, which they have, and then launch surprise attacks on that area, destroying vehicles in reserve. That this is vehicles in reserve that can be picked up quickly by the front line, and they're just vulnerable sitting there. This could evidently also just be bait for the Palestinian forces, trying to let them come out from the tunnels, attack the area, and then they know where they're attacking from and so on, which may be why we haven't seen any attacks, because they're not willing to take the risk. And I'm going to end off this video here. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.